Welcome to WisDOT and Autodesk collaboration for Civil 3D. My name is Mitch Lavin from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation Methods Development Unit. Today we're going to talk about Autodesk collaboration for Civil 3D and how WisDOT has implemented it so far. We're going to talk about what we have done, what we have learned, and what we plan to do in the future. I've been with the Wisconsin DOT for about 11 years now. I first started out at the North Central region in Rhinelander as a design and construction engineer. I used Civil 3D in multiple design projects through my career at the North Central region, ranging in simple rehab to full reconstruction. I was there for 6 years, and after my time in the North Central region, I moved to Central Office, or the Bureau of Project Development, in the Methods Development Unit. I've been with MDU for 5 years, working on Civil 3D training, support, standards development, and anything that goes to implementing Civil 3D for Wisconsin DOT use. Earlier this year, WisDOT kicked off a pilot project using Autodesk collaboration for Civil 3D, which also utilizes Autodesk Docs and Autodesk Construction Cloud. This project was kicked off January of 2022. This project is on I-41, and it's a major project in the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. It has 5 design segments, over 200 Autodesk Construction Cloud users, over 23 miles of interstate highway. There's 12 external design business groups or external consultants that are part of the project, and then also 1 internal design business group as well. And then we have a business group within ACC for MDU and 1 for Autodesk for support. So how does the Wisconsin Department of Transportation handle Civil 3D projects? In the past, we started using Civil 3D in about 2010 or 11, somewhere in that time frame. And ever since then, we've been using network storage for all of the Civil 3D projects. Each region office has a network server where these projects are stored. And as you can imagine, there's one to many editors on one single Civil 3D project. So we all have, or everybody in the region has, right access to these Civil 3D projects. There could be dozens to hundreds of working files in a single Civil 3D data shortcut project, and then hundreds to thousands of connections depending on the project scope and size. Starting in early 2020, we went to, at the DOT, a remote work, as mostly everybody else did. Everybody was working from home suddenly. And since then, we've kind of gone back to a hybrid model. We're in the office for 2 days a week for most region staff, and then at home for 3 days a week. The issue with that is, what do we do with these Civil 3D project files? Civil 3D files do not open very fast over the VPN and network storage, but there's a lot of people that choose to do that. We also have workflows where we copy the files local to the C drive and then work on those files locally, and then once the files are done, we copy them back to the network drive, or where the network drive version is the master version of the Civil 3D project, and the local is just the temporary cache working location. We also have developed a best practices script for doing this copying as automatically as possible. Some people use it, some people do not. But overall, through the regions, there's different practices as far as this remote work and Civil 3D projects. Again, there's some that are working over VPN and some are copying the files locally. So what do we do when we have internal and external stakeholders on one single Civil 3D project? In a small scale scenario with 1 to 2 collaborators working on a Civil 3D project, perhaps 1 internal, a couple external, so on and so forth, we could do a small scale manual synchronization, lots of communication, and store these files, a master copy of the files on a generic cloud storage solution location such as Box or SharePoint. If we want to go to a large scale mechanism for collaboration, right now or in the past, really the only solution was to utilize ProjectWise, which is a product developed by Bentley for use with MicroStation and Open Roads. Not really catered towards Civil 3D usage, but it does work. There's a totally different mechanism for data shortcut projects. Or a new age solution, which is coming out and developed by Autodesk, and it has been out for a while now as well, is utilizing Autodesk Construction Cloud, Autodesk Civil Collaboration for Civil 3D, BIM Collaborate Pro. There's a whole large range of products that allow Civil 3D projects to be stored on the cloud with collaboration between lots of external and internal stakeholders. So now we're going to talk about what exactly is Autodesk BIM Collaborate Pro, Autodesk Construction Cloud, Autodesk Docs, Collaboration for Civil 3D, Desktop Connector. A lot of this information pulled off of the Autodesk website, but I also have learned a lot about the interoperability between the different services and products that Autodesk offers to allow Civil 3D to operate or store files in a cloud environment. Basically, BIM Collaborate Pro is a license, an additional license on top of Civil 3D that gives subscribers access to BIM 360 and the Autodesk Construction Cloud platforms and access to cloud services that allow subscribers to host files in the cloud and access them from anywhere. That also gives us access to collaboration for Civil 3D. Now, Autodesk Construction Cloud is a cloud-based design, construction management, and collaboration solution, or in basic terms, it's the cloud storage of files that are used in Civil 3D. Collaboration for Civil 3D basically allows users to collaborate on Civil 3D files. It gives users access to data shortcuts and external references. Now, BIM 360, as I mentioned earlier, it is actually a legacy cloud storage. It was replaced or is being replaced by Autodesk Construction Cloud. It is still out there, but as a legacy operation, the new way to go about cloud storage with Civil 3D and collaboration for Civil 3D is through Autodesk Construction Cloud. The last bit of items that actually make this whole connection work is Desktop Connector. Desktop Connector is the software that controls the synchronization of Civil 3D files between the local workspace and the cloud. It downloads files, performs automatic locking on the files, and uploads and automatically unlocks the files when they're done and completed. It is basically the mechanism that allows the Civil 3D project or Civil 3D files that a user is accessing to be stored on the cloud, brings them down to the local machine where the actual engineering and the work is completed on the files, and then we'll save them back to the master location on the cloud. So what actually is the cloud? It's a computer or storage server that's located elsewhere and owned by somebody else, mainly used for storage, and is accessed through a web protocol. Since this is only accessed through the web, you aren't usually working directly on the cloud when working on a file. There's only a few cases where you can be working on the cloud, and that's typically through a browser. Think of a software such as Word Online or Excel. When you're actually editing a file within a web browser, typically at that point you are editing the cloud version of the software. If you're working on a local software, you're typically only working on a local copy. So basically what's happening there is you're syncing the files between the local and the cloud storage. There's some automatic locking that's happening on the cloud. And Civil 3D is really only can operate in this mechanism. The Civil 3D files must be located locally, and you cannot edit a Civil 3D file directly on the cloud using Civil 3D. We first started having internal discussions at Methods Development Unit about BIM 360 back in the fall of 2019. We had heard rumblings that this was happening and coming, which was definitely needed. Then comes April 2020, March 2020, and we're all working at home, and we decided, hey, this is going to be pretty important. So we go and start looking at and installing BIM 360. Now, BIM 360, again, is a legacy format of cloud storage with Autodesk. So we're testing Desktop Connector, communication with Autodesk, and we did a lot of testing throughout 2020, 21, and into 22. So then March 2021 comes along, and the project chief out of the Green Bay office contacts Methods Development Unit and basically states that the I-41 project, Majors project, is funded and currently approaching 30% design, and plans to be staffed by in-house and external firms once we get past 30% and move into 60%. We're planning by the end of 2021 that the project will be moving on past 30%. We'll be starting to implement all of the in-house and external contracts, and are looking for a platform to store the Civil 3D projects and basically the design project on a location where all of the consultants and in-house staff can work on the Civil 3D projects or on the I-41 project all at the same time, in the same location, same platform, etc. They asked us, what platform do we recommend to be worked on? And we got to make sure that this does actually work and does not fail. So what does MDU actually recommend? We know there's a known path for large-scale collaborative environments for Civil 3D projects, and that is ProjectWise. It does work with Civil 3D. There's some consultants know this process and continue to use it. We do know that it's potentially slower than ACC, Autodesk Construction Cloud. It's basically, ProjectWise is basically BIM collaboration developed by Bentley Systems, which is no way affiliated with Autodesk. So there's some workarounds that need to work with Civil 3D to get it all to work together and be collaborative. So that's one option. Option two, the unknown path, is somebody hosts a Autodesk Construction Cloud project or site, and we give it a shot and see how it works. At the time, we knew that ACC was close, but not quite ready for full implementation, but possibly it was ready for a pilot project. Civil 3D DWGs, data shortcuts, external references are all proprietary, so the best company to provide a cloud solution for these items and objects is or should be Autodesk. They know the Civil 3D DWG in and out, data shortcuts, extras, etc., and they know how to handle them. But did we actually trust Autodesk would address our needs fast enough? Because ACC was close but not quite ready for full implementation. And will these needs be met with accurate implementation and results? In the end, we realized that Autodesk was on the right path for a solution. And so we decided that we'd recommend Autodesk Construction Cloud for the I-41 project. Once we decided we were going to go with ACC for the I-41 project, it was time to start preparing for the January 2022 project kickoff. We first set up a project structure in ACC, and that started with a top-level ACC project. Then we added 9 Civil 3D data shortcut projects for each design segment, and then also one for a base shared segment that allowed existing data and topography to be shared up amongst all the other different Civil 3D projects. We then set up permissions through business groups. We have a bunch of business groups for each external consultant business, a business group for the internal design staff, and then some support business groups. We added administrators. And then we had a big portion of our work, including testing Civil 3D and collaboration for Civil 3D. We had to develop best practices, provide feedback to Autodesk, hoping to shape the products for the future, and then develop guides and be a resource for the I-41 project team as they jumped into it in January. Once January rolled around, it was time to set up a Zoom call with all of the project staff, the project supervisors, project managers, and all of the external consultants that were going to be involved on the I-41 project. We talked about Autodesk Construction Cloud and what it all entails. We talked about the different software and how Desktop Connector downloads files to the local for Civil 3D usage. We'll lock the files. Once you're done with them in Civil 3D will save and close. Desktop Connector will upload those files to the cloud and unlock them. We showed them how to use web access in the web for viewing files, unlocking files, and also accessing past versions of the files. There's a very vast depth of versioning that's available for each DWG that's uploaded. And then we talked about licenses and how to be able to access a Civil 3D data shortcut project, you need to have a BIM Collaborate Pro license. Talked about permissions and how we're going to add users to the ACC site, a business group, and then finally the ACC project. And then we showed them how it works all together. We showed how to use Civil 3D, how to work through Desktop Connector, and provide examples. We shared all of that knowledge on a final web page on the WisDOT Civil 3D knowledge base. We see that here, and this is a more detailed account of what I just talked about, but it was very beneficial to be able to have a talking point for everybody to go back to and reference as they jumped into it. So where are we at in October 2022? Currently, we have over 200 users in the ACC project. There's 15 business groups for permission setting, and I think 11 or 12 dedicated to actual designers and project staff on the I-41 project. The other ones are for support. We're adding new users every week and also removing them. As I mentioned earlier, there's 9 Civil 3D data shortcut projects with over 3,000 AutoCAD Civil 3D DWGs. Of course, there's been a lot of issues over the past 8 months, mostly with Desktop Connector. We've had issues with lost work, people not being able to access services, and we have had to set up multiple support groups with Autodesk and figure out a way to best support these users as they come up with these issues. But with all of the issues that we had with Desktop Connector, there's been a lot of improvements over the last 8 months, and currently is passing the screen test, which is very, very good for the implementation and for the future. So how did we set up the project structure for the I-41 project? Here's the basic example of what we set up for the I-41, and I think is actually working okay. Basically, when we're looking at it locally, we see the Autodesk drive, Autodesk Docs drive, which is the drive where all of the files go to locally. Then there's the WisDOT account, which is the account or the site that WisDOT owns and all of our ACC projects are hosted under. Then the ACC docs or the ACC site project that we see is 11306301, and that's the project-specific ACC project is basically the hub for all of the project files on Autodesk Construction Cloud. Within there, there's a couple folders that house the different project files, and I believe for the field can go somewhere else now, but it's default. We got that when we started it, so we kept it. And then we have our Civil 3D working folders. So if we don't use anything in for the field yet, we're just storing our files in project files. And then within project files, we have the base 30, which was all of the design files from the pre-30% design in ProjectWise. Oh yeah, that one thing I did not mention is this project was in ProjectWise before we moved to ACC, so that added additional complexity to the migration and getting it to Autodesk Construction Cloud. And then we also have the DSGN or the design folder, which contains all of our design projects. Within the DSGN or the design folder, we have all of our Civil 3D data shortcut projects. So in Civil 3D, we set our working folder to DSGN, and then we can access our data shortcut projects here. We have different design segments, and then we have one base shared folder, which contains all of the existing data, such as existing surfaces, topography, utilities, that can be shared amongst all the different design segments. In an ideal scenario, permissions are set for each business group so that each firm has edit permissions for the Civil 3D project and design segment that they are responsible for. All business groups then have view and download permissions for the Civil 3D data shortcut project working folder, so DSGN, as I mentioned here. That's where we ideally will have our view download permissions. And then depending on which project they're responsible for, we'll add the edit permissions to the Civil 3D project folder, which was working very early on. But there was one point that a Desktop Connector version decided to not allow view download permissions on the Civil 3D data shortcut project working folder. We had to modify our access for all of the business groups so that there was edit access to all of the Civil 3D projects and the DSGN folder to allow the users to be able to access the Civil 3D data shortcut project. This is not ideal, and since then, that issue has been resolved, and future versions of Desktop Connector will allow view download permissions on, in this case, the DSGN folder or the Civil 3D data shortcut working folder, and then allow for edit permissions in the responsible Civil 3D project folder below it. To access this software, WisDOT currently utilizes a network license model for our Civil 3D access and a named user license for InfoWorks and the BIM Collaborate Pro licenses. At some point in 2023, WisDOT will be migrating to a named user license model for all products. For ACC, to be added to an ACC account, users must first have a free Autodesk account. Then a BIM Collaborate Pro license is required to utilize data shortcut projects while in Civil 3D and while working in ACC. WisDOT provides a BIM Collaborate Pro license for all WisDOT staff, which is assigned within the user account when they are added to the ACC account. Most external partners have their own BIM Collaborate Pro licenses, and those licenses do transfer over when they're working on the I-41 project. There are some external partners that utilize a WisDOT-owned BIM Collaborate Pro license on the current I-41 project. This was allowed for this pilot project and will be reevaluated once WisDOT moves to a complete named user license model and if WisDOT moves to fully implement ACC statewide. So what have we learned through the last 8 months of utilizing ACC Desktop Connector on the I-41 project? And also, I guess, what have I learned, or what have we learned in using it for non-I-41 projects? Number one, with the current Desktop Connector, the pending actions dialog is very, very important. It's very critical to keep an eye on while working in Civil 3D. It's very important to see if and confirm if your DWG, after you saved it in Civil 3D, is actually getting uploaded to the cloud and actually getting unlocked. Another thing that you can check on is looking on the web version of the files and make sure that the latest version is getting uploaded and is actually getting unlocked. Another thing that we've learned is that ACC does not make your internet faster. So that is one thing that is limiting, is your speed and bandwidth of your internet access. Currently, with the current DC Desktop Connector, if you open a 100 megabyte file and that file has 5 100 megabyte external references or data shortcut references, all of those files will download and sync every time you open that file that is being accessed. So your internet connection is very important to make your experience in opening files the best as possible. The current Desktop Connector is very, very aggressive in the amount of references that are downloaded and synced when opening a particular DWG. For instance, if we have a plan sheet drawing that consumes in slope intercept drawing, which consumes a corridor file, and then an ALI profile, clipped existing surface, a project existing surface, which is built by a LiDAR feature line file. If we go and open that plan sheet file, all of the references above that file in the reference tree will be at least looked at and perhaps downloaded and synced every time that plan sheet file is opened. This can be very time consuming depending on the size of the data above it in each file, and is very dependent on your internet connection. A future version of Desktop Connector is looking to fix this, where only files that are really needed by Civil 3D will actually be downloaded and synced. So that means less reference syncing and downloading, which is good for performance. Another cool tool that comes along with Desktop Connector is Reference Explorer. We can see this image on the right. I'll go to it in a little bit, but Reference Explorer is a cool tool that allows users to analyze file connections. Right now, it currently is only available along with the Desktop Connector install, which is free, by the way, anyway, so you can go install Desktop Connector just to get Reference Explorer. But it allows us to utilize and see the connections of a file. So for instance, we have our cross-section file here, and we can see where all of our data is coming from in that file tree. It'll show us the reference types. If it's a data reference, we can see that D here, or what type of external reference it is. In this case, it's overlay, or the other option is attachment. And then it also shows us if there's any circular references, which could potentially cause problems in especially Autodesk Construction Cloud, because there's a lot of reference checking to make sure everything is there and available. So if there's a circular reference, there might be issues with that. But the Reference Explorer is very important and a beneficial tool to help designers check on project health and make sure all of our files are connected and available in a project tree. It is so important. It's my belief that that Reference Explorer should be a standalone product. It should not be hidden within Desktop Connector. It should be available to anybody. It should be almost an automatic install with Civil 3D just for project health alone. Another thing that we have learned is data management is very, very important for a clean project, especially on Autodesk Construction Cloud. It is so important, we have developed a custom Civil 3D knowledge base web page about data management for Civil 3D projects. If you want to look at it in further, all you need to do is go to the Civil 3D knowledge base and search for data management. It should be the #1 hit. It's very fresh off the press from October of 2022, but it discusses what data management is, why do we care about it, and what we need to know about data management. So it's a good tool. I'm going to cover over the basics here in this presentation. The biggest part of delivering a design and plan is the decision-making process of developing the design, not the drafting of the sheets. You shouldn't have to look up the design standards after you design a project. You should look up those standards before you design a project. The same concept should be brought to data management and developing and building a Civil 3D project. We need to understand the structure and the naming of our files and where each file should be stored and what each file is used for. Before you even get started on a Civil 3D project, it is best to develop a plan or a storyboard for your work before you even start. Decide what your existing data needs to be, what design data do you need to build, what sheets are needed to convey your design intent and message, and then finally, what contractor data pack files are needed for delivery to the contractor to best build the project once it's done. The first time you do something in Civil 3D, you should not be thinking about what shortcuts I can take. You should be learning the complete process and following the steps to get the process done the best practice. Only after you understand the process and know how to do it is where you could be looking to take shortcuts and how to implement those shortcuts in your workflow. Another tip that we've realized especially with implementing an ACC, is to minimize how many references are being attached to DWGs. If you need a external reference attached to DWG permanently, that is fine. But if you only need an external reference for one 5-minute piece of work, do not keep that attached the whole time. It just adds to that data structure and connections and increases chances for circular references, which can cause problems, and then also other syncing problems as well. So just minimize the amount of references that are in a DWG. Only hang on to what is actually needed. Don't always keep your external references attached if they're not needed all the time. And then when you're thinking about the reference tree, just remember to try to always keep your data flow in one direction to avoid circular references. If we click on this reference tree here, for the most part, the data flow is working from top to bottom. In this data structure, I accidentally built a circular reference with the marsh surfaces. I should go back and fix that, but I just want to show that this is very easily done. This was an accident by me. I did not realize I made a circular reference, but I somehow did. So just use Reference Explorer, check on your project health every now and then, look for circular references, and figure out a way to avoid them. But for the most part, Autodesk Construction Cloud does work. Here we can see we have automatic locking. This is within the Start tab of Civil 3D, but we have automatic locking from different users for different files, and files upload, sync, and they do unlock easily. Another cool part about Autodesk Construction Cloud is users can go and unlock their own files from the web and also access the version history. Here we see on this quarter file, we have 16 versions of the file, and all 16 are available for download. You can make version 11 the current version of the DWG. You can make a copy of it and store it somewhere else. So that's one very good benefit about using ACC is if there's a corrupt file, we can always jump back to a version previously that we know was in good shape, and we can bring that as the current version and try to avoid whatever caused that file to go corrupt in the first place. So what about the not so good portions of Autodesk Construction Cloud and Desktop Connector? The number one issue that I can think of right now that really isn't working well is the sheet set manager or the legacy version of the sheet set or the DST file. There is no automatic mechanism to unlock or lock. Actually, the files do get locked, but there's no mechanism for auto unlocking the sheet set file or the DST file when being used on Autodesk Construction Cloud through Desktop Connector. So that opens up issues with multi-user collaboration on a big project. There needs to be a good communication between users if edits are being made to the DST files that are part of a Civil 3D project. It's so important that we actually turned off, there's a variable that auto opens sheet set manager or sheet sets when a DWG is open. So we disable that. So if a DWG that is associated with a sheet set, that sheet set will not open when that DWG is opened. Another issue is the survey database, and it's similar to the sheet set manager. There's issues with automatic locking and unlocking, and it's not really known. I haven't done much testing. I just know that the survey database is not really supported to be used with Autodesk Construction Cloud and Desktop Connector. One idea was that we could modify or build a survey database locally on the C drive and then migrate that database to Autodesk Construction Cloud through the web to be utilized in the Civil 3D project. You can use the survey database, it's just the editing part is questionable. The last thing I want to mention on this not so good slide is Desktop Connector again. It is working, it does work a lot of the time, but there has been a consistency of issues throughout the usage on the I-41 project and also in support through our channels that we have with the I-41 project. And a lot of the issues come down to references and reference checking. We see issues with file locking and lost work. And it's just something that I wanted to mention here because it is very important that people know about what's going on with the current Desktop Connector. But with that being said, Autodesk does realize that there is issues with this. And I wanted to talk about the new Desktop Connector in my presentation that Autodesk is currently working on. So I've been part of a beta program, and a lot of other people have as well. And I'll show you how to get, if you are interested in joining the beta program for Desktop Connector. I have some information later on. So I wanted to talk about this new Desktop Connector in this presentation today because it's important to understand that Autodesk does realize that there is problems with the current Desktop Connector. They're working on it, and so I approached Autodesk before putting together this presentation to see if I could talk about the new Desktop Connector, and I got the approval. A lot of this information that I'm going to be showing in the next few slides was talked about at Autodesk University a few weeks ago, and with collaboration with some of the slides that they presented at Autodesk University, I put together some of these slides here. Basically, the current Desktop Connector, we know of a bunch of pain points. Performance is slower. There's lack of native Windows commands in File Explorer. The right-click menu is pretty dumbed down to just commands for Desktop Connector. There's challenges when working outside of Civil 3D and AutoCAD. And then, as I mentioned, there's challenges with references and lost work. Autodesk realizes all these pain points are out there and have been working on, in the background, a completely different and new Desktop Connector. This new Desktop Connector has many targets to meet. They want to have quicker project and folder navigation in Windows File Explorer. They're hoping for faster open times, full access to File Explorer commands such as copy, paste, zipping and unzipping, right-click menu, and automatic lock and unlocking for all file types. They have a 3-tier model that they want to approach with this new modernizing of Desktop Connector. They're hoping for feedback, familiar, and fast. So when I mention feedback, they want to be able to, users when using Desktop Connector in Civil 3D, get feedback on what's happening. A better home screen action statuses, better home screen error handling. So when I see the home screen, the right-click menu, or when you select the icon for Desktop Connector in the Windows tray, you can see all that right there. It's very accessible. Automatic unlocking and locking and conflict management in the home screen as well. you want to know, it's got to be familiar. So you got to be used to, when you're using like OneDrive or Box, familiar application locations. So access to desktop connector from the Windows tray, the File Explorer ribbon should be accessible when doing file operations in Windows Explorer. Same with the right-click menu, should be available and familiar. Same with all other file operations in Windows Explorer. And then the last thing, they want it to be fast. Project navigation should be fast, folder navigation, file open times in Civil 3D, and smart download and sync. So when Civil 3D asks for a reference, it's going to download and sync that. It's not going to go and download all the files in the file tree, only going to download exactly what's needed for that file open operation. And then it's going to respect external reference overlays and if the external reference is unloaded or not. So when I mentioned the right-click menu in Windows Explorer, we can see that here. This is what is being shown in the new desktop connector. The right-click menu is just the normal, what you see when you go into a regular Windows Explorer right-click menu on a file. And if I don't show it here, but you do see the ribbon as well. So it's very familiar to what you're used to seeing in normal Windows Explorer, which is a plus when we go into this new desktop connector that's coming out. For downloads and syncs, the new desktop connector is very transparent. It's right in your face when you're downloading. So if you go open a file that's not synced to the device yet, it'll go and a notification will pop up showing that that file is being downloaded and what file is actually being downloaded and the status of that download. And then when you're syncing a file or save it and close it, if you go and click on the desktop connector icon in the system tray, you can see the status of the upload. And this is where also conflict management, error handling would be resolved. If there's an error with an upload, it'll show it in this Windows or this dialog here, and you can resolve it right from this dialog. There's also been improvements in desktop connectors in the references and versioning. The current desktop connector syncs every file that's in the reference tree of the file that's being opened. So if there's a file and it has 10 files above it or 10 references connected above it, it's going to sync every version of that or every file in that reference tree. The new desktop connector is only going to sync what is needed to open the file. It's going to look for the first level of references, or basically what Civil 3D needs to open, and then it's going to download and sync those files. If you have them already downloaded, it's going to do a quick version check on those files and make sure you have the latest version. If you do, it's not going to go and resync them. The current DC does go and actually sync and download all those files in the reference tree, even if you have the latest version. There's just an issue with that. It's slow, and the new desktop connector is going to be much faster in this file check and download sync operation. And even just the whole downloading operation is much faster in the new desktop connector anyways, which is a plus. So as I mentioned, I'm part of the desktop connector beta. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement to be part of it. And if you're interested in joining it, Autodesk asked me to share this slide. You can join the beta program by scanning the QR code here in the bottom right, in the right-hand side of the slide, and submit your email and company name, and you should get a follow-up to see if you're added to the program or not. The benefit of joining the Desktop Connector Beta program, or even the Infrastructure Futures Beta program, is that we're able to help shape the software as it's being developed and not after the fact. So we can test beta software, and I believe the new Desktop Connector is on beta 4 right now. So there's been multiple opportunities for people to test the beta versions of the software and provide feedback, notify Autodesk of any issues, and hopefully once it's fully released to the public, that it's in much better shape than it would have been if people were not testing the software. And that just improves daily life of people actually using the software in production. So it's a good way to provide feedback to Autodesk and get the software to where we want to use it on a day-to-day basis in production. So as WisDOT moves to the future, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to move away from the license server for Civil 3D access, and we're going to move to a named user license model and hopefully integrate that with Windows single sign-on to minimize any sign-on experiences for the users and also minimize the amount of work for people coming to WisDOT or leaving WisDOT and having to manually assign them a named user license for accessing Civil 3D. And then with that, we're going to potentially evaluate ACC for implementation statewide. We do realize that there is going to be need in the future for remote work at WisDOT, and it's not going away anytime soon. So we need a solution to be able to work from anywhere, home or in the office, and still collaborate. There's a lot of work being done just for users to try and manage their files when working in the office and working at home. There's manual operations to copy files from the network servers to the local device and then back to the network once the files are finished. And we realize that ACC will improve that time and make their lives easier. So if we do move the ACC implementation statewide, we do have a limited number of BIM Collaborate Pro licenses, so we're certainly going to review our current BIM Collaborate Pro license distribution and see where we go with that. And as far as Civil 3D goes, if you're not aware, WisDOT only implements Civil 3D on the even years. So we're currently using Civil 3D 2022, and it's expected that Civil 3D 2024 will come out in April of 2023. And with Civil 3D 2024, we expect to look at and implement SheetSet What Manager Web, which was implemented with Civil 3D 2023. There's certainly going to be improvements in Civil 3D 2024 when it comes to Autodesk Construction Cloud usage, because one part of it is Desktop Connector, the other part of it is Civil 3D and AutoCAD. So as the AutoCAD and Civil 3D move forward, there's going to be improvements in Autodesk Construction Cloud and Desktop Connector integration. And with that, it does take time for WisDOT to migrate the state kit from Civil 3D 2022 to Civil 3D 2024. So we expect a few months after Civil 3D 24 comes out that we'll have a state kit available and we'll fully implement 24 statewide. WisDOT has barely scratched the surface of Autodesk Construction Cloud. We're only using it at the moment for really design and Civil 3D file storage and collaboration among users, and that's just on one smaller project. But there's a lot of other services and tools that we could use and perhaps maybe use in the future to make our projects better. And those include like Autodesk Build, there's Autodesk Bridge, which bridges projects between ACC sites. There's clash detection, things we could probably integrate, issue management, plan reviews, things like that. So again, we only have scratched the surface in Autodesk Construction Cloud, and certainly something we will be keeping an eye on in the future and potentially add some of these other services to our Civil 3D projects and construction projects. But nothing's guaranteed. Right now, we just need a spot to store Civil 3D files on the cloud. So that's where we're at right now, and maybe in the future we'll go some more expansion. Who knows? And with that, are there any questions with the WisDOT implementation of Autodesk Construction Cloud and Civil 3D? And if you have any questions following the presentation that you weren't able to get answered here in the presentation, be sure to send me an email, and you can see that listed here on the screen. Thank you.